Alright, looks like I'm making a video. Probably. I should hold this microphone. Yeah, probably should do that. I don't know, maybe it'll help. A rough day, long day. All kinds of crap going on. Anyway, people suck. I mean, they just suck. Just, I don't know. You can't take people's word for anything. It's, just, yeah. Despicable creatures, humans. Anyway, I won't go into details, but maybe when it's over, then I will. Yeah, talk about it. All you can do is like shake your head. Just, how did I get on such a shitty planet? Anyway, till next time for that. And we'll just move on to some more of this Hythloday physics crap. So my gripe is again that he keeps defending some idea of physics as somehow it's within some realm of acceptable or reasonable, some portions of conventional notions, but there's no real description of that exact thing beyond making some point about the universe being mathematical in some weird way where the components don't have to be real objects, which doesn't make any sense. So I can't, there's just no point in me trying to paraphrase because he just says so little. I mean, he has some affinity for some sort of field theory or vector spaces. You know, what does all that crap mean? Do you believe in an ether then or something? What are you talking about? Are there things in the vector spaces, or are the vector spaces just vector spaces? I don't know. It's just too ambiguous, ill-defined, foggy, whatever the right word for that is, blurry. So you can't argue with it because it's just this blurry mush. You know, it could be anything. His definition of reality is so vague. So anyway, we left off somewhere around here, so we'll just continue.
That the statistical, there appears that although I don't have it at hand, I'm taking a word that
yeah, right. You're taking the word of, again, how I've pointed out, they can't describe the simplest experiments accurately. And you're taking their word on really complex experiments. So that doesn't make much sense. I could go back to the whole Alan Aspect thing, you know, the guy who did the first entanglement experiments. And nobody's ever redone his experiments because he's claiming some copyright, patent rights to his super beam splitting mirror thingy or some other crap. What's all that about? I mean, these aren't scientists. These are people doing something else. But he'll take their word for it. The evidence is somewhere. It's just not where you can get it, which really shouldn't be what science does. Science shouldn't be hiding evidence. We should be able to inspect it. We shouldn't be able to be. We shouldn't be told, "Oh yeah, we have a whole bunch of evidence. You know, it's in the back room." But you can't really look at it.
There are many experiments, many hundreds, thousands of experiments, which could all be said to conform to this one.
Right, and so more vague. You're just guilty of the same crime. You're just telling me about. You're telling me about evidence. There's a bunch of evidence in that other room over there. Yeah, we've never really analyzed it or looked at it, but the knife is there, the fingerprints are there, all the evidence convicting this guy is in there. Don't worry about it. Yeah, sure, okay, I trust you. Yeah, I don't.
Some theory. There are a few classic experiments
They're not classic, quote unquote. They're the foundational experiments, the experiments that led them to a conclusion. And then once they had their conclusions, they just looked in the rest of the world for anything that supported their conclusion. And any evidence that's counter to the conclusion, they totally ignore. And that's the game played. Again, they can't even repeat these classic experiments. Again, the Eddington experiment never successfully repeated.
That are too often detailed in the lay sense.
And too often detailed. They're not detailed. That's the whole point. They're completely inaccurately described. That's the only way you can describe what they're doing. The descriptions are not accurate. They're not consistent with the actual history. They're not consistent with the actual product of the experiments, and he's just pretending, defending the pretenders.
And it's very difficult to get the technical details.
Right, none of that should be difficult to get. They should be repeatable experiments. They shouldn't be, in any way. The results should be quite decisive, not indecisive. And the problem is a lot of these experiments are pushing technology. They're pushing capacity. The Eddington experiment, even without all of its failures, even under perfect conditions, is still a marginal experiment. There's all kinds of room for tiny errors that just ruin the results. It's a very small thing you're looking for, and a very precise measurement.
Even papers that are published and go through peer review don't contain all the blurb. I think this is if one academic wants to confirm another's results, yeah, because they both.
So again, this is just more excuse making. We know that in the 1960s they did the experiments. They filmed them being done. So there's no doubt about anything. They did that in the 50s and the 60s. That we had the technology. They were capable of doing that. And you're making excuses for why now it's all secret and it's all some personal, it's all club thing and it's all industry thing. And they don't want any competitors to steal their mojo. And this isn't the way science is supposed to be done.
Then get the Nobel Prize because it only acquires a truth value when the results are confirmed by alternate sources. I think the technical details of how they did the experiment is exchanged personally. Yeah.
Okay, you think something. Okay, so more of this vague references to what you suppose. And so that's supposed to mean something. Again, you're making an argument that, oh no, it's really there. They do have the evidence. It's just that they only give it to other colleagues and they only do this and so you're just making more rationalizations that indicate that somehow it's not shenanigans when it has the smell of shenanigans.
Over the phone, email, the equipment we use, etc. It's just unfortunately not made available to us.
Yeah, right. There's no videotape of the Stern-Gerlach experiment ever being done, apparently. There's not a single photograph even of it being done. And here it is, the foundational experiment for electron spin. The whole theory of electron spin is based on this stupid experiment and the conclusions they drew about what this experiment reveals. Even the idea of giving electrons a frickin' dipole moment, as if the electron could possibly be a dipole, which doesn't even make any sense.
So, anybody who wants to call somebody a liar on a specific experiment really is without.
Right. So they can mislead. They can, claim functions that they haven't demonstrated to exist. Again, the whole idea of interferometers, they keep saying they know how it works. Yes, it has something to do with wave interference and stuff. but they don't have any theory for how that takes place at all. Again, you can't see. There's nobody who blueprints how the photon travels through the experiment. All you get is ideas about different photons traveling through it, and then how do different photons wave interfere. I mean, there's no consistency. There's no logical consistency. It doesn't make any. You can't go A, B, C, D. There's no progression of the thought chain here at all. It lacks all the things that a good theory should have. Except the propaganda. It has plenty of that. It has plenty of hype, plenty of, yeah, we've done it, we did it. Lots of that kind of crap, but no substance.
Gaining access to the paper without gaining access to the raw data and access to the complete experimental setup and repeating that and saying this is what happens, not what you said, all right? That's calling somebody a liar without going to that extent, I think is...
Yeah, well, I think it's just bullshit for you to sit here and defend horribly performed science, hype on experiments that weren't even done. I mean, their crimes are egregious. They're overt violations of the scientific method and the scientific discipline. There's no intellectual integrity to their process at all, and you're just making excuses for that lack of integrity. Why shouldn't somebody call it a lie, okay, when it's a persistent description of history? I mean, it doesn't the persistency of an inaccuracy to some point make it a lie? Nobody can fix it. Hundreds of years, you're just going to keep saying the same lies about the history? Come on. There's a point where you have to say, no, that's not acceptable. 100 years and not one of you has enough integrity to say, well, yeah, that Indian experiment was not a good experiment. Just wasn't. It wasn't compelling evidence.
It's not all.
Yeah, well, fuck you. I have this sped up substantially.
Just on a note here, I've been teaching my nephew about leverage and machines. I've already spoke about this, and now I've been doing a bit of bicycle mechanics with him and let him try to turn a knot that he's clearly too weak to be able to do, and then give him a long lever.
Oh, turn a knot? I don't know what turning a knot is.
But now he can undo all the knots. He has the power.
I don't know. You have a bicycle with knots in it. Okay.
And it occurred to me that what is torque except an abstract number? Yeah.
So again, what is it? No, it's a mechanical process. They're all mechanical processes. It's not an abstract number, torque. The amount of force is either in its velocity or in the density of it. Those are the two ways you measure it. It's velocity and density.
Force times the distance. And maybe perhaps.
Obviously, it's force, distance, and time.
I can't, off the cuff, explain to you why torque.
So because you don't have an understanding of the mechanics, the flow of force, let's call it, because you don't quite understand how it moves through an electrical circuit, let's use for an example. So you you just don't get it. Electricity and voltage and amperage, and it can, you just don't have an idea of it. It means there's no idea. We have to call it an abstraction. So a current moving through a wire is an abstract notion. There's not a physical event taking place. No, there's a physical event taking place through the wire over a period of time. Nothing abstract.
Way. Why this abstract number is important.
Right, so this abstract number, it's not an abstract number in the first place. The number has to do with a specific amount of something moving from point A to point B. Again, this isn't, so is this your statement about the physics you believe in? You think it's just some sort of thing that happens that doesn't have any mechanical process, when we know that everything is a mechanical process. We know that the electricity has to, if we break the wire in half and there's no conductor, that it stops the process. We know this stuff. There's nothing abstract about that.
Where is it? When I balance a beam such that it balances with a large force on this, but closer to the fulcrum, and a lesser force over here, and I multiply it out, and I say, look, see, we have.
Yes, you have a bunch of mass on one side and a little bit of mass on the other side, and so now if you apply a force, it's going to be translated as very the density. It's going to have to spread across a lot of matter in one circumstance, and it spreads against a tiny amount of matter in the other circumstance. So obviously, the little bits of matter have to convey more force. So in a sense, they have more voltage. They have more potential, because a lot more force is interacting fewer material bits, where the other side, the force, is being spread over much more density. And that's the difference between the balance. The balance still exists, and the only thing that's changed is now one side has to have an equal and opposite reaction in a tiny amount of matter to compensate for the action of the big pile of matter.
100 Newton meters, 20 times 5 on this distance, and 100 times 1 unit of distance on the other side of the fulcrum. So we have clockwise 100 Newton meters turning force, and we have anti-clockwise 100 Newton meters turning force. Therefore it balances.
Right, but it's only balancing again. So if you're cramming 20 amps through a thick wire, it's going to have a different effect than when you're 20 amps through a little thin wire. I mean, you can make analogies to other force conversions and recognize, oh, there's a big difference. So that's why the little end has all of this power, torque, is because the little end is doing an equal and opposite reaction to a big giant movement of a lot of matter.
I'm not so sure there is a high level theoretical mechanical understanding.
Wow. Well, you're not sure because, well, number one, I'd say you probably haven't researched it. So you're just saying, well, I've never saw anybody just, randomly or in my exposure to videos, no one's ever really talked about torque in a mechanical sense. They've always just done it in the mathematical sense. But clearly there has to be a mechanics to it. I mean, I never heard anybody talk personally. I've never seen somebody, talk about a rocket going into space, or like the space shuttle, and talk about the fact that, well, you see all this force coming out of the back end of the rocket. Well, an equal amount of movement, technically, is the opposite reaction. And that's happening inside the space shuttle's metal, and inside all of its little tiles and the little people, and all of those things are absorbing the same amount of movement that's flying out of that back end is being absorbed by those objects on the other side of that equation. I never saw anybody talk about it in a kind of mechanical sense that that's what's really happening.
to such a basic thing. There is in physics the notion of angular momentum and angular forces. And the meaning...
Yes, and they're not abstract, and they're not just a number. They're a process. And we see that all of these processes take time. None of them are instantaneous. And so this is we've gotten a lot of information over the last 10,000 years, and we've acquired a lot of knowledge about some of this stuff. So let's not pretend, oh, it's all so mysterious. No, it's really not.
Is entirely mathematical, it seems.
It's not entirely mathematical. So again, it's entirely mechanical. I mean, you can do the math for the lift of an airplane. You can do the math for every single thing, the structure of a building and how much it's allowed to wobble, from wind and still stand straight. How much stretch and elasticity you can have inside the steel and all that kind of stuff. You can do it all mathematically, but it's a physical process. It's not, it's not an abstraction. The waving of the building back and forth is not an abstraction.
In this sense.
Right, just if that's your notion, okay, yes, there's people who think physics is math, so you really just think there's not physical processes that take physical time to do because the stuff has to physically move. And you don't think any of that's happening. You think just some thing called an abstraction is going through some process. And so then you call it an abstraction because an abstraction is what's doing the process. It still doesn't make any sense. There's nothing abstract about it. It's clearly a material, hard, real event. There's a real event. Real events aren't abstractions. There you go. Do you think real events that take place, even if they are events for a little sparkly thing, even if the thing is a little piece of sparkly amorphous glitter, little sparky bit, the fact that the sparky bit goes through a process is not an abstraction. The sparky thing might be an abstraction, but the process isn't an abstraction. We know that all this stuff happens through a process. That's why none of it happens instantaneously. So he's clearly just rambling because he has to think, well, now where do I go from that nonsense? How do I sew this into any kind of, rational piece of clothes?
So on that front, another number, abstract number, all right, which has essentially...
So accepting his silly premise and silly example of a non-abstract event, which is the movement of force through instruments of torque or instruments of mechanical instruments. Let's take our false, idiotic notion that somehow that's abstract. So now we can go find some more abstractions.
No meaning is energy.
Right. Well, we know the word energy, yes, doesn't have a very good definition. Okay, so everybody can probably accept that we've used the word just for the parts of the energy that have some relevance to us, the parts that we can see and feel and touch. But I would argue that most physicists know that there's lots of energy that we can't see, feel, and touch. And that I would argue that the giveaway is that what we kind of call energy isn't the force itself. It's when the force is in imbalance. When there's more of it going one way than another way, and we see the byproduct of that. But when we see energy equalized, we don't count that energy. Because we say, oh, it's not doing anything. It's stuck. It's a tug of war where there's nobody's winning. We only see the part where one side is winning. And we call that energy. But there's a whole lot of places where No, there's lots of force. It's just balanced, so you don't see it doing anything.
Closest meaning I can garner to give it, to tell you, is that it's movement or potential movement.
So in a sense, it's not, because obviously it can be in a circumstance where it's negated anything we would consider to be movement. Now, the idea that it could be doing this, you know, and vibrating so little that we don't see the vibration, like Brownian motion. You only see it when you use a magnifying, a microscope at very high power, and then you realize can't see anything because everything's moving too much.
Now that's current physics. And
so I would argue that's not current physics. That has nothing to do with current physics. That's just junk. Playing vocabulary games, again, we could argue that the old vocabulary is a huge liability. The fact that language is dependent on traditional definitions, and that it takes a long time for sometimes words to be fixed and corrected. So we have lots of vocabulary, like the word spontaneous and like the word random, where we should be saying things like apparent spontaneous or apparent randomness, because it's not real things that are really random.
It's an abstract number. I think it's a really...
So again, just more nonsense, this abstract crap. This is another word that just doesn't really have a meaning. There's no such concept in any kind of... There's fantasy, you could argue. There's fable. There's something false or made up. But it's not abstract. I mean, God isn't an abstraction. God is a pile of made-up nonsense. It's not abstract. Abstractions are, by almost definition, mischaracterizations of something, are delusions, or made-up nonsense.
Good effort, although it appears to be problematic in its consequences. But
again, this has nothing to do with anything. Again, the concept of energy is not critical to your understanding of the physics of the different mechanical systems. The real thing you do have to understand is the idea that there's forces, or something they might call a field, and that the field is where this capacity to influence, this mechanism of influence takes place, and that these fields operate at the speed of light, and generally speaking, these forces. And they transfer from one thing to another momentum.
It's certainly the right philosophic starting point to try and make energy a concrete notion, and
so again, the vagueness of the word energy, I would say, makes it sort of redundant or superfluous. The word understand is the word force. That's the thing to understand. And then you can just call the force is energy.
Idea that to do this, that movement is stored up by collecting things which in some sense are continually moving inside it, right?
Yes, the simple notion that there's moving bits, force, that are always perpetually in motion forever and ever. You cannot destroy their energy. That's the energy cannot be created or destroyed. They exist as a finite amount of momentum, moving the speed of light, and that they carry it in these little quanta packages. and the packages are possessed by something. They're captured inside of it and exchanged effectively. You collect a quanta going this way, and you release a quanta going that way. And then now you possess more quanta going this way than that way. Kind of obvious. And now you have the momentum.
That is. It's a genius insight. I don't know.
Again, you know, how can I take that even seriously, right? You're just saying, oh, Hythloday just says it's a genius insight. Well, what credibility can that have? Because you don't have any rational notions of reality. You think in abstractions are real things, and real things are meaningless.
I won't say that word because I don't want him to think I'm, you know, but it is. That's the.
I don't want him to think what? Like I say, how can I take it seriously? I mean, I can't take it seriously. I can't take it as meaning anything, because you're the place it's coming from. I mean, it's like somebody who never read a book telling me how great Dickens was as a writer.
That's the right way to go. Yeah, it's a thought that some of his thoughts. I rather think I've had myself at times in history, but I haven't had that thought.
Yeah. Well, see, this is what makes him a horrible dissident. Is that yes, he's you know, used his imagination to recognize that there could be, you know, better answers to these questions than all of this mumbo jumbo about bent crap and, you know, frickin' infinite number of wavelets and all this other mush. And you know, he's dared to imagine, oh, well, maybe there could be something a little simpler than that.
That is entirely unique thought.
So he says entirely unique just because he hasn't had it, right? He hasn't researched the globe to see if it's unique. He's just said, well, I never thought of it, and I guess I never heard anybody else say it, so now it's unique. But it's not a very high definition of the word unique. Yes, I would kind of argue that it appears to be rather unique, but nobody else has gotten it.
And I think one day when science turns to try and make itself less mathematical and tries to say, okay, now.
Yeah, right. So now he's implying that, okay, I get it. Okay, math is kind of a silly language to be describing real shit with. I mean, it is such a gross generalization. Math doesn't have too many verbs in it and doesn't have enough adjectives. And just, you know, math isn't a very good language. It nails you into little tiny categories and little tiny, it's 2 or it's 3 or it's 4. You know, it's narrow. It's not expansive.
We've exhausted millennia trying to get this mathematics any better. We can't. Let's try and come at it from a constructive point of view. And there are.
So again, just hilarious. You know, a constructive point of view, and what other point of view was there from any point? And so he's almost conceding that the crap they say is ludicrous and silly. You know, that it isn't on the constructive, rational path. It's on the whoop-de-doo, loop-de-doo path.
This is the notion. One approach is the notion of cellular automata.
So he just jumps into the rhetoric of gibberish, you know, cellular automata. I mean, quantum was already a layer of technical sophistication, one already below, you know, more simple, more rudimentary than cellular automata. No, the idea is to recognize this stuff gets simpler, not more complicated. So as soon as they said the word quantum electrodynamics, they were already on, that was the constructive path. But then they converted that the idea of that there's packets of energy, that there's a Planckness to the universe, that everything just breaks down into these little units that are doing all the function, that it is dominoes, and the dominoes aren't made of another universe, they're not made of something complicated, they do a very simple thing. They're already on the right, they had it, they had the basic vocabulary, they had the right vocabulary, they had the right definitions, and the problem is they totally just forgot what they were looking for, and then just started to write a religion instead.
All right. It's a very physical, constructive way of thinking of how things arise and function.
Yes, well, the main thing we can figure is that this is all about movement. And that's all there is. There's movement of things. Yes, we're big things and we move, but for us to move, lots of little things have to move. And then even smaller things have to move for the little things to move. And you're just trying to nail it down. Like I said, when they came up with quantum mechanics as an idea, like I said, it was a perfectly rational title. The title was excellent. The book sucks. The book is idiotic, okay, that they wrote. But the title was perfect.
But yeah, this notion of absorbing the movement, I don't like DraftScience's vocabulary.
So this is where, you know, he hasn't pinpointed what he doesn't like. So he has this vague notion, I don't like it, and I think it has more to do with I just don't like Inmendum being right. That's what he doesn't like. Okay? It has nothing to do with, because I've said it in so many ways, and he's almost going to concede his own, oh yeah, no, that's a fucktarded complaint I'm making, because he has exactly done what he's supposed to do, which is put it in almost any language. I mean, anyone who likes any kind of part of any mechanical science could appreciate what he says, because he does talk about momentum and velocity and acceleration, and he does talk about the distinctions, the clear distinctions between the positively charged and the negatively charged, and then the force having two components that are correlates to those two components. Yeah, he's done all that.
It works for his purpose.
It works for his purpose. I mean, it would work even better to my purpose if, when we defined these things, they weren't ill-defined. So again, the whole idea that, you know, Benjamin Franklin made that stupid little mistake of, you know, identifying plus and minus wrong. And then they keep it, and then to make Maxwell's equations work right, you know, they end up having, you know, current moving one way and voltage moving another way. You know, imbecilic things that are just completely break the mechanical system, our understanding it as a mechanical system, you know, because you're stuck with little broken things, broken pieces of vocabulary that you never fix. Again, they have like 17 different ways to measure energy. Yeah, you know, there's, you know, there shouldn't be 17 different ways to say the same thing.
And it's if you allow him to express his meaning over a broader category, a larger body of statements, it's fairly consistent. But
so yes, exactly. Yes, it's consistent with making this simple argument that there's quanta that perpetually moves, and there's quanta that doesn't do anything until you force it to. So you have to feed it motion. It has to eat it, has to consume it, has to possess it. See, there's three words I used, right? Eat, consume, and the real word was possess. It needs to trap it. It needs to put it in a cage and now it has its original vector. It possesses that because it's caught it in a circle. The circle nullifies the energy, but you can't undo what went into the circle.
Even very consistent, right? But you can't scrutinize DraftScience's vocabulary like I've been guilty of. I would get wrapped up, and it would drive me insane that he would
Yeah, see, it's weird to me that you could say this was a real big problem with these subtle uses of these words when the concept is so basic. I mean, I've always argued there's the stuff moving the speed of light. That's the forces. That's the stuff that has this perpetual motion capacity. And the matter stuff, the electrons and the protons, are the things that are going to be interacting with that stuff. And they can't have the perpetual part until they're in an arrangement that allows them to capture the energy in such a way that they take advantage and have more birds in the cages. They only collect ones with birds that came this way. And so they have them all in cages, but they all came into the cage in the same direction. And now it can have that direction.
Would call this the force, then he would call it the quanta, then he would...
And it's exactly the same thing. And exactly, I just... well, anyway, he's conceding that using more than one word is not a crime, so...
Call it,
force bits.
The force bits, yeah. I think the best thing that he's talking about here is it's okay, it's good that it's force, but and maybe I contradict myself here.
Yes, maybe your critique is kind of pointless because I can only work with the language they created. So they say things like field when they want to describe a bunch of soldiers moving somewhere. They use words that I have to still use their words. I just have to explain that, no, look, it's not a field of stuff, okay, where you tell them to start walking. No, if there's no walkers, if there's no soldiers, there's no field. The field's only there because the soldiers are there, and the soldiers are always moving. So you can't have a field that's not doing something. What it does is its definition.
But there has to be an element of understanding, which he has, and that's his motivation. And I'm not sure anybody following his science understands this idea of the need.
Yes, well, this idea that we're all stuck with these words, and if people are anal, insanely, in thinking everybody's going to have the same definition of them, the same understanding. So again, all I can do is I can say, look, when people disagree and they say, you violated conservation of energy, and I have to explain, no, I really didn't. Or angular momentum, it's a tricky kind of concept. The people don't have a common understanding of the concept, and so it's good if you can break it down into, well, I'm just talking about the momentum part. This angular part doesn't mean anything to me, because I'm basically arguing that the only part of the momentum that matters is the part that turns into an imbalance. The part that's outside of the balanced part is the only part that matters. The only part of the energy equation that matters is the part that has something to do with an imbalance.
Because of the specification of energy and the need to bring it concrete, the need to accept this notion of force, and I would say what he's implying is also the movement. Yeah, you've got to accept that in that notion of force that he
Yes, but this goes all the way again to the Newton that everybody bemoans and what's the word I'm using? Disses, just disrespects. I mean, the idea that something doesn't do something unless a force acts on it. I mean, the idea has been around so long, and it's just such a basic idea. Yes, there has to be a cause to the effect. And especially with big matter things, it's obvious that there has to be. It's obvious that things just stay where they are if there's nothing imbalanced in there. They've reached an equilibrium, a comfort, a place where everything is quiet, and that it needs something to break the quiet. And the only thing that breaks the quiet is a force. There's no other way to break the quiet.
He's capturing movement, and it's kind of in a sense that movement is fundamentally conserved.
Right. So that would be a way of saying energy conservation is just movement conservation, or and you could cut it all the way down to this quantum level, and recognize that ultimately that's the force, that's the stuff that's doing it. So when two planets crash into each other, what's crashing into each other is two different forces technically. They've both possessed a whole bunch of birds, and now all the cages are going to get mixed, and when that mixture happens, all these birds are going to fly free.
And therefore, it must be captured in some way. As I say, I think it's even a separate approach to physics that is mechanistic and deterministic.
You're right. See, now that's not a separate approach. That's what physics is supposed to be. Physics is supposed to be mechanistic and deterministic and cause and effect. That's what physics is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be about let's see if we can try to find some angels in here. Let's see if we can try to find real magic. That's not what physics is supposed to be. Let's try to make it into a UFO. That's not what they're supposed to be doing.
Deterministic. Because it must be amenable to reason, it will have a mathematical counterpart.
No, I mean, the idea that you can describe some things in the language of mathematics. See, now that would be a term to use. Like maybe everybody who's ever going to use the word mathematics or maths as an important function or concept should do it with the recognition that math is just a kind of language. You're just symbolically representing an aspect of something's existence. Because I have this with me, I now have a quality of two-ness. There's two separate material devices barely connected to each other by this tiny bit of force being applied. But we have two-ness. It's just a quality. It's just a word we're using to describe one simple characteristic. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm very different than this thing. I'm made of different substances, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't say anything about what we really are. It's just describing one tiny feature of our existence. So math is a language, but it's a very weak language in terms of describing the realness of something. It's real, the complexity of it. It's a simplification. And that's the usefulness of math, is it finds the important detail for a certain, what you're trying to figure out, is how strong is this connection I have to this that makes it two-ness for us. It won't be two-ness if I let go of it. We're not two-ness anymore. And so the math gives you the capacity to make it simple to understand what's the important feature that we're looking for, because we're trying to see causes and effects. We're trying to see effects. We're trying to see something that does change, something that does have a consequence, something that matters because it's going to make something change. And so yeah, it's really good for that purpose, to formalize it, to take all the junk away and just look at the important feature. and understand the relationship that's important, which is just this amount of force being applied by these fingers. But that's all it is. It isn't an understanding of how this thing was made, or how this thing became mine, and how it became, we became two. It doesn't tell you any of that.
Right? And it can too be checked in its mathematical implications.
So again, the math is, I'm not going to say it's superfluous to the cause here, but the rational science guy is right, Bill Gates, when he talks about physics is supposed to be something you can draw me a picture of. Physics is supposed to be physical. It's supposed to have elements, and elements that move over time, and there should be no inability to diagram the process. It should be diagrammable, even if only in a cartoonish way, just in the, well, it's got 4 legs and a head and, like a cartoon horse or something. It doesn't have to be a detailed model, but they should be able to model it. And, creating this abstract math is just modeling features that it has. Just one tiny feature of it is being modeled. It's a completely inadequate and insufficient to anything called understanding it. You're just understanding effects. You're not understanding how the interaction develops and how it functions. It doesn't tell you how it functions. It just tells you what it does.
It's just the mathematics will be born of mechanics rather than...
Right, and that's why I don't have any disagreement with most of the mathematics. So again, this argument that you have to, because you change the model, that you have to change the math, is a ludicrous notion. The math of the inverse square law can be explained by my theory of particles, or it can be explained by bending a space. Lots of different ways to illustrate the simple mathematical feature that exists. And there's lots of ways to explain a two-ness. Lots of ways two-ness can be created.
What current theoretical physics holds is mathematics and then backwards trying to fit...
Again, I don't think that has anything to do with it. I think the problem with physics is that if you're going to get a very hard to acquire degree and a proficiency, you need a proficiency that has real world use. So you need to be an engineer in the end. You need to be able to engineer the outcomes. And so you need the mathematics to be able to engineer the outcomes. And so that's why it's so focused on it. But the math isn't anything to do with the real understanding of the physical processes. It's only giving you this understanding of the stuff that we've isolated as important for a particular purpose. The particular purpose of keeping a building upright. And even there you can see the lack of imagination sometimes, where they'll make the building out of steel and concrete, when they could make it out of laminated plywood at 1/10 the cost.
Mechanics to mathematics.
I think this is the end, but long transitions. That's why it's good to have notes, so you don't just do this. I don't know what's next. Something or nothing. Something or nothing.
So yeah, what I think is quantum mechanics is a good theory.
There we go. Okay, you think it's a good theory. I've pointed out how all the evidence for its basic functions is rubbish. The evidence for any wave interference thing, they still haven't proven any of it. They haven't proven any of this, photons bent by gravity crap. They haven't proven Heisenberg. They haven't proven Huygens. They haven't proven anything called entanglement. There's no real proof in the sense that the evidence is incredibly marginal. And so here you're saying it's a good model. It's a good theory. Well, no, it isn't. It's really kind of rubbish. And you just, all this hype, you just keep hyping it. And it's this rubbish theory that's made out of a bunch of cobbled together crap. And again, huge inconsistencies in the evidence. I mean, I've already pointed it out, but I mean, they use water waves for the two slit because it matches. They don't use water waves for the single slit because it doesn't match. Then the multi-slit gets really complicated. So there's no consistency here. I've pointed out the radar experiment can be explained by exactly the same math as jamming. It has nothing to do with anything having to interfere. Use exactly the same mathematical formula and jamming will explain. There's no need for a Huygens, no need for two waves to interfere, no need for any of that crap. It's just a signal out of phase, you can't receive it. What's so complicated? Oh, absolutely nothing. So it's hugely... It's the fact that you can't say the words that this is weakly evidenced mumbo jumbo. It's just really just a lot of talk with very little substance behind it. And here you are saying it's a good theory. Good for what? It doesn't match anything. It's not consistent with relativity. It's not consistent with bent space. Why is it a good theory? Why? Why do you give it all this conceding that it's somehow doing something miraculous when it's doing something completely unmiraculous? Again, when Feynman's describing the Newton's glass, all he's doing is saying, look, I can make a formula because the pattern just keeps repeating over and over again. 1 to 16, 1 to 16, 1 to 16, over and over again. Wow, I did something impressive. That's impressive? That impresses you? Going to Las Vegas and calculating odds? That impresses you? Being able to go to the roulette wheel and say, well, that one's 50-50, and those odds are 75-25, and those odds are... That impresses you? That's big science? You need a big giant brain to do that? No, you don't.
Insofar as they say that these experiments have been done, and it conforms. And it's mathematically conformed. So
there it goes again. They've been done. I pointed out how they haven't been done. So how duplicitous can you be? It's a good theory, and the experiments have been done, and they were really good experiments that were quite explicit. There's no way you could doubt the results of the experiments because they're just so black and white perfect. Every single one of them, black and white perfect. Yeah, it's rock solid. You can't have any other conclusion. And their own frickin' book is full of, well, maybe it's Huygens, or maybe it's random, or maybe it's Copenhagen, or maybe it's many worlds, or maybe, I mean, they're all, does a single photon interfere with itself, or do other photons interfere with each other? They don't have a single answer to any of these questions, and yet you're sitting there saying, oh, solid theory, good work. A steaming pile of crap.
Any attempt to put physical explanations on it, I don't hold to.
Yeah, it's just more nonsense. They're all physical explanations, newsflash. And again, and anyone who implies that let's not bother with that, they're saying exactly that. Let's not bother figuring out what physically is happening. Let's not bother figuring out the causes. Let's just deal with the probability effects. So they're not going to Las Vegas and saying, let's think about the dice bouncing around. No, let's just give up on that, and we'll just concede that the probability exists. We'll just forget about what's causing it, and we'll just do our calculation of odds. And we'll pretend that that was really fancy and important calculation when, no, it's basically just a pie chart, and you can just do it by volume. You don't even have to use Feynman's spinning clock.
Much stock in, because that's not the ultimate claim of quantum mechanics.
Says you. So again, you're saying they're claiming nothing. They're claiming all kinds of crap. So it's just a complete pile of, I don't know how you say this with a straight face, that they're not making any claims. And again, when they don't make any claims, then they're not doing anything. When there's no claims, there's no quantum mechanics. It's just probability statistics. It's a nothing. It's a nothing science almost. It's almost something just for clerks to be doing. It's clerk work. It's just not even. It doesn't even. It's almost hard to call it science. It's so litigiously formulatic, and every formula is just based on the circumstance. So you just see the circumstance and say, well, it just depends on how many little slots there are on the roulette wheel, right? If there's 36, then there's one set of probability. If there was only 12, there would be a different formula I'd use. And if there was 573 little slots, then there'd be a different formula, right? So if a deck of cards had 52 cards, then there's one set of rules. And if it's only 42 cards in the deck, well, then there's a different set of rules. That's all they're doing. So what's that? That's nothing. I mean, that's just litigious math. That's nothing interesting at all. And it's certainly nothing related to anything called quantum mechanics. To just give up and say effects happen, that's quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is effects happen. Oh, okay. Gee, how fascinating.
Right. So this machine is about. It's discovered that it's machine doing machining, or it's finding.
So this is some sort of, now he's moving into the philosophy part, which I probably shouldn't do, but just for the, I'll just throw it in as an extra, but I don't want philosophical conversation on this channel. So we'll just try to keep to the physics part, these claims of physics that are in here. So the first thing I'd say is that it's great to call us machines, but it always has to be recognized that the kind of machine we are is really complicated. There's like more than one machine in the machine. All right, there's lots of this. The coin processor, and then there's the, I don't know how to, there's a whole Rube Goldberg of challenges that have to be met before the Coke pops out.
Itself in a world where the world conforms to machines doing machining, the world conforms to programmability.
I don't even know what that means, the world conforms to it. So do you mean that's how it looks? That there's machines in the other machines in the machine world, and there's, the living things on planet Earth, the machines on planet Earth, have an origin, and all of these machines have a certain functional rules that they're narrowed by, but because of that common origin. I don't know. I mean, you got to be a little bit more expansive. I guess that's my critique. First critique is we're not dominoes. It's a little more complicated than that. I mean, we're dominoes, but I just mean you've got to concede that there's function in the distinctions. Livers are different than brains. The different machines produce different byproduct.
To reason, and the machine finds that while he spent 40 years doing this, acquiring information, with this notion of an I,
so again, this was a video to me, and again, 7 years ago at least, me and the Modern Mystic beat this subject to death, and we destroyed any notion that the I is anything other than a bunch of eyes. I mean, we even, we went through a whole metaphor of dwarves, like the 7 dwarves live inside of us, and these are the different programs, and the different programs essentially are fighting for possession, for the highest seat. They try to jump the highest and grab the thing based on some urgency that they've established as a program, or some credibility. Like the rest of the elves push one of the elves up because they all agree with that elf. You know, this is much more complicated than just some homunculus. This is a bunch of processes that require agreement for certain things to happen. The programs have to all kind of agree to an action. They all have to point. They have to all have the same pointing vector, or nothing happens.
When he subjects what he's learned about the machining nature of the universe and that he's part of the universe, that the notion of the I doesn't really hold up.
Right. Well, the notion that there is a homunculus doesn't hold up, but the notion that you are an individual processing machine, an individual machine that is individually experiencing the world, and you could live, you know, next to a dirty processing plant and you could be covered with soot. You could be in different locations, and you could be living in a humid place and be rusty. You could be somewhere else and have some other performance issues. You can be in places where, oh yeah, you live with a lot of mechanics and they're always oiling you and greasing you, and so you're really always working really well. Yeah. So you don't need to establish some homunculus I to recognize that each one of the machines is processing the world and producing the effect of being conscious and alive. It's an individual thing. Fact. I don't know how you I don't know how you take away the fact that consciousness happens to individual organisms.
Except to guess that it's a kidder, it's a contrick, it's a feature of architecture of the neural connector, the probe.
Right, so it's a byproduct of the function. It's not fake. It's a real thing that happens as a byproduct of the function. So I've given this analogy before to you and you just ignore it, but I mean, you can have an engine that runs really quiet, or you can have an engine that makes a hell of a lot of noise. And what's the distinction? Tiny little differences. But there's a huge difference between noisy and quiet. It's a difference. So I could argue that sensation is a kind of noise the machine creates. It's a real event. Now, it might not be some event that you can see as purposeful or deliberate, but as an event, it's a real thing. And the truth is that one machine, one motor, could communicate with another motor based on that noise being created, because now it's sending a signal, you know, that some other machine can receive. And so now you have the source of communication could be just a byproduct, which is noise. So the noise says, I'm here and I'm alive, I'm making noise, I'm running. And that can tell something over here, there's a running machine over there. Where the quiet one, it's not saying anything. You can't know it's there.
Program. That there are systems and subsystems, and the only way that and they talk to each other, and we've just found a way of vocalizing that this element of the feature.
Well, obviously we don't just vocalize. I mean, again, I'm using the word obvious. I mean, you're going to tell me what I am, essentially. You're talking about what is it to be one of these machines. I'm personally being one of them, and I don't hear you using vernacular or words that have any relevance to how I'm experiencing me being here. Okay, because I don't just have vocalizations. I have a conscious experience where my brain lets me see some glimpse of why I have vocalizations. And those vocalizations are created in my subconscious, but the theme reeks. I smell the theme of where my vocalizations are going. And I've seen it before. And I'm recognizing it. I'm recognizing that I sound pretty much like me. I'm saying things pretty consistent with this machine. This machine talks this way and says these kinds of things. And my brain has formed all of that. Now I don't get to see all the creation of that, but it's perfectly consistent with the pattern of this machine and its understanding. I mean, it's just, again, you keep wanting to make this into some knee-jerk and pretend that there's not this complex arrangement of knee-jerks that as a byproduct is creating noise, the noise of feelings, the noise of sensations, and those sensations are decidedly pleasant and unpleasant. Decidedly.
Which for an animal might only have impulses. We have a system.
So again, just might only have impulses. Well, what do you mean? Impulses that are based on a fact of feeling good or feeling bad, being attracted or being repelled by a sense of bad odor or fear or some negative feeling, some queasiness, some discomfort that drives them to know this is not good for you because it doesn't feel good for you.
System which can pause the impulse and run it through a separate algorithm and say, yes, we'll give the impulse the go ahead, or no, we'll do to reach this end that we've decided, this purpose we've decided, and again
So again, yeah. Look. It gets way too complicated getting to the details. Just get to the point that matters. Do what math does. Get to the relevant bits. The relevant bit is you don't think feelings have any meaning or qualitative difference because they're just dominoes. Well, I'm arguing that as a conscious organism, I'm telling you there's no doubt about the qualitative difference, and I would be insane to deny the qualitative difference. So that's one subject. I mean, playing this game about how that is created, we can go through lots and lots of metaphors of description about how the illusion is created. The theater, the screen, the participant, the whole thing is being created inside our brain. That's a fact. It's a whole theater created in our brain by arranging patterns. But they're real patterns. They happen in our real brain. It's really a material thing that's making the noise. The consciousness noise is being made by a real machine. It's a real thing then. You can't say the noise isn't there. So I'm experiencing it. Clearly I can detect the noise.
This is all metaphor. That the other routes and decisions, yeah, but in a real thoroughgoing sense, the Turing domino machine.
Okay, this Turing thing is just such a bullshit. This is Piro's nonsense rhetoric. The Turing machine is just the idea of creating something that can fool us. Okay, it doesn't have anything to do with it being us. It just has to do with whether you can create something that can speak in a manner that fools us into thinking it's real. It's really a human. So it doesn't mean anything because that's just mimicking, and so it has nothing to do with capturing the realness of it. And I would argue that I think they could never make one of these machines without having a machine that had to learn the real way through reward and punishment and experience. Because you could always detect it. I mean, you just ask simple questions. Say, are you religious? Do you believe in God? Well, the machine now has to choose whether to be an irrational lunatic, because it'll never be able to be consistent if it chooses. If it says, yes, I believe in God, it's doomed to fail, and because it'll start being so inconsistent in its logic. You should just start asking, what do you believe in evolution? And then it's like, it's gonna break down because it won't know how to construct all the lies. So once it starts telling lies, it's dead. So in a sense, it'll be programmed by the lie of some statistical analysis of what the average person says, and that statistical analysis will not be coherent. So it will always fail the test.
Here, just had an input to pause the Turing machine, which would output a somewhat automatic response.
Cramps.
So it gets to press the pause button, continue Turing machining, and then allow a decision. No.
So again, the process will be completely dissimilar to the process through which we construct our vocabulary. It won't have any real similarities to how our conversation is created. Again, it will just be trying to create like a counterfeit painting or something. It'll have nothing to do with how. It'll just be make it look like.
Now, there's another zone which has to make sense of that in vocabulary terms, yeah? And we've come to call certain things to have meaning. And
we've come to call certain things to have meaning. So again, in the conversation to me, I've said this over and over and over and over again. How we assign value is not the conversation. That, I will say, is most human beings assign value insanely. Just no reason to it at all. It's just they're allowing their native impulses to make the designations. There's no logic involved. There's no reasoning involved beyond scheming. There's no foundational understanding of the mechanism. And the only thing I'm saying has value is the fact of the existence of negative sensations, pain, suffering, torment, disquiet, and comforting ones. The absence of burden, the absence of harassments, the absence of pain. So all you have is pain and its absence. That's it. So argue the existence of that kernel. Is to me, that's the only part that's real. That's the only part that has integrity as something you could say is true. Is the very fact that there is this huge distinction between the harassment and the absence of the harassment.
We attach vocalizations to these, and you relate this word very much to some similar workings on that your program has had to thrash through, and it attaches to that and says one of the meanings is...
Right, but it attaches to the idea of a negative and a positive, and the source of the negative and positive is always a sensation. So if nothing's being harmed, then nothing can be bad. If something's being harmed, then their bad is a potential. It's that simple, the math. There is no force, okay, without the harm. There's nothing to calculate.
I just means this checking function, yeah? Or even...
So again, no, the I part just has to do with the pain is happening here. This machine makes it, the sensations. I don't exist, the sensations don't exist. They don't exist somewhere else. They're not in space somewhere. They're not floating somewhere. We don't capture consciousness. We manifest it.
And all the experiences, emotional and tactile, sensory perceptions, are all similar.
And nothing about those senses, most of them, have to do with sensing for the purpose of tolerances. So most of the senses have pain or unpleasantness associated with them. Now vision is probably an exception because unlike some primitive organism, light isn't going to make us feel pain or something like that. Like there's some organisms where they just want to know whether it's daylight or dark, and they just avoid the daylight. That's all their eyes are for. Obviously, our sense of vision has been established to provide much more information about how to mechanically navigate to feel better, but the eyes aren't the things creating your feelings, where the other senses are feeling senses, in the sense that they will give you a sensation of a positive or a negative sensation. They'll make you feel good or feel bad.
Primarily derived of programs which effectively, digital programs, could be Turing machine in principle. There's no reason to not think that's so.
Yes, there's plenty of reason to know that's nonsense, in the sense that the Turing machine, if you gave it the capacity to feel, it will have a human conversation then, just by having vocabulary, because now it knows what bad is. Now it understands bad. So give it the sensation of bad, it will understand bad, it will understand why doing bad things is bad, and it won't have to mimic or pretend to understand why. I could ask the Turing, why do we put people in jail? And it'll come up with a bunch of, analogies or arguments. But the only way you really understand it is, well, to prevent bad.
When we look at the functioning parts of a neuron, the digitality of it, right? And then we see the complexity of the connectome.
So again, I'm supposed to use a word like connecton. Brain is too, that's too weird, that's too strange a word, saying we have a brain. No, I really don't understand this part at all. Why he thinks connecton should be the language we use to describe the vessel that creates our consciousness, instead of just using the word brain.
Every reason to think that complexity could give rise to such a illusion.
And again, it's not really an illusion, because something real is creating it. It's a real arrangement, and as I've stated before, we could extract probably 97 or 96% of my brain, the intelligent parts, lots of knowledge parts, memories, lots of stuff that is superfluous to that fundamental purpose of going ow. And there would be that part that goes ow. And that part is an arrangement. And I can put it in a jar and put it in space, and it's still going ow. And it's a real arrangement that's causing, that it's correlated to. So it's not an illusion in any sense, in the sense that it's not fake, it's not a misrepresentation, it's not like we were fooled by a mirage. A mirage is a real thing. I mean, the actual movement, the actual changing of the photons, it's a real event, okay? We're being fooled into thinking, oh, it's a paradise, it's palm trees. When no, it's not palm trees. It's just, waves of material that are bending the photons to make them look like it might be palm trees, but there's no palm trees. That's an illusion. Our sensations are not an illusion. We're not misrepresenting them. We're not misidentifying them. They're real. They're happening to us. We're manifesting it. You can't just say it doesn't exist. It exists. It's real. Now, how you see it, if you were to look from the outside in or look at it, well, yeah, it's hard to describe exactly how it manifested it, but it's made out of real components. It's a real thing. The noise is coming from something. A process.
Now, as regards morality, most recently...
So he again uses this word morality as, again, this is supposed to be a response video to me, and again, I've for 10 years have pointed out, I've been arguing it for 30 years, morality is a terrible word to use. It's so tainted by dogmatic religious morality. Morality is just established as edicts from high that don't have any logical foundation.
Mendham has stood on the grounds of brains. What it's all about is brains.
Yeah, well, I don't know how you missed that. I just don't. It's not about livers. It's not about my pancreas isn't doing it. You really think my pancreas makes me conscious? No, I mean we've seen. I mean people have been whittled down to almost just a head. All right, they've been, you know, we've kept people alive who are missing a lot of organs. Okay, we know the organ that matters is the brain. So why is this a fucking conversation? Why am I having an adult conversation where I have to defend that brains make consciousness? Holy shit. I mean, what kind of dodge are you pulling to pretend you don't understand that our consciousness is a brain function?
I say that lacks a certain scientific ambiguity, because the next question is, what a brain?
Okay, so I don't know why it lacks a scientific, whatever he said, right? When, of course, that's not what it lacks, so he didn't even make that sentence correct. So if you're going to make these critiques, you ought to at least get your sentence correct, not have the negative in the wrong place. So he's trying to say that somehow it doesn't say it. It doesn't say all you need to say by saying brain. Consciousness is a brain function. That doesn't say enough. Oh, it says plenty.
And you'll probably say, I don't know.
Why would I say that? For 10 years I've been explaining exactly what brains are, especially in metaphor, though. Because obviously I can't tell you exactly what happens between the hippocampus and this part and this part and this part and this part. I don't have a diagram, a schematic of all the functions of the brain. But we can see what manifests out of it and describe the, properties and the functions, and we can put them in categories based on what properties and what functions they have. So don't pull this bullshit that I don't have a definition. I've used words like programs. I've used words like a bunch of knee-jerks. I've used all kinds of analogies describing what the brain is. It's a complex as hell fucking thing. 100 billion neurons, each having 20 potentially different connections.
What constitutes a brain? But I want to say, clearly it's brains. Yeah?
Well, is it something else? What is your argument? Is there some other, you think something else is happening? You think consciousness is something other than a brain function? Fuck.
Yeah. Does a worm have a brain?
Yeah, the question is yes, I would argue that a brain is defined by having neurons. Now, whether it's a brain capable of manifesting consciousness, that's an open question. So I have established, quite clearly stated, that I don't think, any organism that, if you can't learn, you don't feel. This feeling really only has function as reward and punishment, and reward and punishment only has function as a learned process. There's only point in giving you a sensation, the only point in it is for you to learn to avoid a negative thing that causes the negative sensation. So that's why it exists. That's why our brain, through its evolution, took advantage of the mechanism, is because it's fundamental to being able to learn. You can't learn without it. Without reward and punishment, you can't learn. So yes, I would diagram that the things that can't learn, that is, they don't show any capacity to learn that the food goes, to make a right turn, you get the food, you make a left turn, you get no food. If it can't do that, it doesn't feel.
Does a jellyfish have a brain?
No. I mean, that's sort of a scientific fact. It really just doesn't work based on neurons. you know.
Um, this is no different. The step that Pyro takes appears to be that, yes, he accepts that saying brains is arbitrary, so he lets the notion.
So again, there's nothing arbitrary. I don't know why you're saying that all brains have to have the same functionality. No, they don't all. All cars don't have electric windows. I mean, there's clearly a feature, okay, when brains reach a certain sophistication, you know, whether it's 250,000 neurons, or whatever the number is. I mean, people play 250 million, you know, like a fruit fly, different little organisms. But again, an earthworm can actually learn right and left, from what I understand. So I would say that's probably where you're starting. That's doing the ouch thing. That's doing the I feel good, I feel bad thing, because it's learning.
Of consciousness just mean reacts to physical stimulus. Yeah?
No, it doesn't. So that's it. It's not just reacting. They all react very differently, and clearly in the circumstance like a human, we act insanely differently. There's people with, you know, pierced ears and tattoos, and there's people with, you know, long hair, and there's people with, you know, stupid, idiotic philosophies. There's all kinds of distinctions and differences in how we manifest being a machine. And we do that through this process of learning, where some animals, a skunk is a skunk is a skunk is a skunk. You know, there's subtle little differences, but they're not going to be nearly as dramatic.
That's all I say I am doing. I'm here in a world reacting to physical stimulus, and so he opens the book to anything that essentially reacts to physical stimulus.
Well, obviously that's idiotic, right? And the manifestation of the feeling, the theater, is a complex thing. So the theater of feeling is the, you know, that's the bit of functionality that would appear to be not easily to fall on. You're not going to just fall on that one and easy. That requires some sophistication. So there has to be some complexity for you to manifest that. You can't do it with a single neuron or two neurons. You're going to need a lot more complexity in the flow of the electricity to possibly create that illusion. By your word, I would call it more like that property.
Now, this machine as a product of evolution, and a good statement that Inmendham makes is evolution has to get right answers, in a sense. All right?
So that's kind of dangerous. I didn't say evolution gets right answers. I was talking about our brain's function in terms of being able to see the world as it is. If we see illusions all over the place, we see things that aren't real, we're not going to be able to navigate the trees, and we're going to get eaten by the wolves. So we have to see the trees, and we have to understand we can't go through the trees, and we have to have a certain accurate perception of the reality to be able to navigate it. Now that's the limited statement I made about how much knowledge or logic is applied. The innate feelings, as I've stated before, are a lie. They are nonsense. They are not rational. Our desires and our addictions and our obsessions have absolutely nothing to do with any logical calculation to say what should I love, what should I hate, what should I find delicious, what should I find repugnant. We're not given the capacity to learn those things. Those things are imposed on us. Okay, I can't fix the fact that a rotting corpse smells horrible. I can't just mentally say, no, it doesn't. You know, I can't do that. It's not part of the machine's capacity. But there's no rational reason that it should be so obnoxious once I understand, oh, don't play with dead things. Well, once I understand that, I don't need this repugnant smell to be so obnoxious. It just gets in the way, because I might have to clean up the dead thing. and I don't need to be, you know, made sick just because I need to clean up something that's dead.
Oh, so in some sense, that's the intuition, the emotional morality that I do.
Okay, so that nonsense. So again, I've made it clear I have no respect for our innate bigotries, our sensibilities, the silly things we're attracted to, the fact that I find certain things aesthetically pleasing and certain things aesthetically ugly. Those things are not rational, they're not fair, cuteness, all of that crap. It's not a fair judgment, it's not a rational judgment, it's a completely fucktarded pile of conditioned and native programming that has nothing to do with me doing a rational calculation with my intelligence and deciding what should I love and what should I hate. That doesn't, we're not given that faculty to be able to write that the basic hardware. And I've stated clearly I have absolute contempt for most of the basic hardware. It has no logic. It's about being a monster, a tyrannosaurus, a brute, an asshole. That's the native programming, is to be me first. That's not intelligent.
Do feel is born of some truth, some reasoned truth. And it can't be an arbitrary reason of truth.
Okay, so again, there's no reasoning in the basic function beyond the creation of a genetic multiplier, beyond the objectives of evolution as part of its function, not of its intent. But the design clearly is the winners replicate, the losers fail to. And that's the definition. It's a silly definition of winner and loser. And I have, there's nothing rational in it at all. It just has to do with the rules applied by evolution. And the rules have to do with this fake notion that there's some success, there's some meaning to you conquering, destroying, killing, doing all this stupid stuff to be the winner. That it matters somehow that you win and they lose. It doesn't matter. Perfecting the species, improving the species, any of that shit has any real value. I mean, it has none. It's a gladiator war, and there's no victory in winning.
That as soon as there's some cut-off point and brains get morality regard, yeah, one neuron don't do it, but two, bam, yeah, yet they're just two mechanical Turing machines.
I can't even follow that, so I think that's probably a place good enough to cut off where it's just getting sillier. Obviously, two neurons don't make a sensate organism. And I also would argue that obviously we're more complex than a knee-jerk. We do have different functions, different levels of programming. We have crude levels, we have conditioned levels, and we have sophisticated levels. The only part I say have the potential to be logical are the intelligent ones, obviously. The rest are not logically derived. All right. So, till the next time and such, and so forth and whatnot. But again, he doesn't paraphrase my position accurately. He's, you know, and he evades all of these points I made over and over and over and over, and doesn't address them at all.